We all know the story of the Titanic, or do we? On April 15, 1912, the world's largest and most luxurious ocean liner supposedly struck an iceberg and sank to the depths of the North Atlantic. But what if the ship that sank wasn't the Titanic at all? What if it was actually its sister ship, the Olympic, disguised as the Titanic in an elaborate insurance scam? Welcome to one of the most intriguing conspiracy theories in maritime history. Enter one of the most intriguing conspiracy theories in maritime history, the Olympic switch theory. This alternative narrative suggests that the ship that sank on that fateful night was actually the Olympic, Titanic's slightly older sister ship, disguised as the Titanic in an elaborate insurance scam. It's a theory that challenges our understanding of one of history's most famous disasters and raises provocative questions about corporate greed, cover-ups, and the nature of historical truth. At first glance, the idea might seem far-fetched. How could such an enormous deception be pulled off? And why would anyone attempt such a risky and morally reprehensible scheme? To understand the allure of this conspiracy theory, we need to delve into the context of the early 20th century shipping industry, the financial pressures facing the White Star Line, and the remarkable similarities between the Olympic and the Titanic. The Olympic and Titanic were two of three sister ships built by the White Star Line to compete in the fiercely competitive transatlantic passenger trade. These ships were meant to be the ultimate in luxury and engineering, designed to outdo rival Cunard Line's speed record-breaking vessels. The Olympic was launched first in 1910, followed by the Titanic in 1911, with the third ship, Britannic, still under construction. These ships were nearly identical in appearance and structure, a fact that forms the foundation of the switch theory. They were built side by side in the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, using many of the same materials and designs. This similarity is what conspiracy theorists claim made the audacious switch possible. To understand the roots of the Olympic switch theory, we need to turn back the clock to 1911 and examine the troubled history of the RMS Olympic, the Titanic's slightly older sister ship. The Olympic story is crucial because it provides the motive for the alleged switch in the conspiracy theory narrative. The Olympic was the first of the White Star Line's trio of Olympic-class ocean liners to enter service. Launched in October 1910, she made her maiden voyage in June 1911. At the time, she was the largest moving object ever built, a floating palace of unprecedented luxury. The White Star Line had invested heavily in the Olympic and her sisters, Titanic and Britannic, hoping to dominate the lucrative transatlantic passenger trade. However, the Olympic's career got off to a rocky start. On September 20, 1911, less than 3 months into her service, the Olympic was involved in a serious collision with the HMS Hawke, a British warship. The incident occurred in the Solent, the strait between the Isle of Wight and the mainland of England. As the much smaller Hawke passed the Olympic, it suddenly veered and rammed into the liner's starboard side. The collision caused significant damage to both ships. The Hawke's bow was crushed, while the Olympic suffered a large gash in her hull above and below the waterline. 2 of her compartments were flooded, and her watertight bulkheads were damaged. While she was able to return to port under her own steam, the damage was severe enough to require extensive repairs. This incident is where the seeds of the conspiracy theory were sown. The repairs to the Olympic were costly and time-consuming. She was out of service for 2 weeks for temporary repairs, then spent more time in dry dock for permanent fixes. This not only resulted in significant repair costs, but also led to lost revenue from canceled voyages. Moreover, the collision led to legal troubles for the White Star Line. The Royal Navy blamed the Olympic for the incident, claiming that her massive size had created a suction that pulled the Hawke off course. This led to a court case which the White Star Line ultimately lost, further damaging both their finances and reputation. Conspiracy theorists argue that this series of events left the Olympic as a major financial liability for the White Star Line. They claim that the ship was more severely damaged than publicly admitted, possibly even beyond economical repair. According to this theory, the company found itself in a dire situation. They had a badly damaged ship that was expensive to repair and might never be fully trustworthy again, while its nearly identical sister ship, the Titanic, was nearing completion. This, the conspiracy theory suggests, is what led to the alleged switch. The idea was that the damaged Olympic would be cosmetically altered to look like the Titanic, then intentionally sunk in a staged accident. The real Titanic would then be put into service disguised as the Olympic. This way, the White Star Line could rid itself of a costly liability while cashing in on the insurance policy for the lost Titanic. Proponents of the theory point to several pieces of circumstantial evidence to support this narrative. They note that after the Olympic's collision with the Hawk, Titanic's launch was delayed, supposedly to allow for the switch to take place. They also claim that photos of the Titanic show it listing slightly to port, which they argue is evidence of the unrepaired damage from the Hawk collision. While these claims are dismissed by mainstream historians, they form the foundation of the Olympic switch theory. At the heart of the Olympic switch theory lies an audacious plan that, if true, would rank among the most daring and morally bankrupt schemes in maritime history. According to conspiracy theorists, the White Star Line, faced with the financial albatross of the damaged Olympic, concocted a plan to secretly switch the Olympic with its yet-to-be-launched sister ship, the Titanic. The theory suggests that during the Titanic's fitting-out period, which coincided with the Olympic's return to the shipyard for repairs following the Hawk collision, the two ships were secretly swapped. The damaged Olympic would be cosmetically altered to look like the Titanic, while the real Titanic would be pressed into service as the Olympic. But how could such a monumental switch be possible? The ships were massive, each over 180 feet long and weighing more than 45,000 tons. Swapping them would have required an enormous effort and the complicity of hundreds, if not thousands, of workers. Proponents of the theory argue that the near-identical nature of the two ships made the switch feasible. The Olympic and Titanic were built side by side in the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, using largely the same designs and materials. They point out that many of the fittings and internal structures were interchangeable between the two ships. The conspiracy theory suggests that during the alleged switch, certain identifying features were changed. These included things like the ship's nameplates, some of the fittings, and the number of portholes on the forward part of the ship. Theorists claim that photographs of the Titanic on its maiden voyage show these discrepancies. One of the key pieces of evidence cited by switch theory proponents is the number of portholes on the ship's forward section. They argue that the Olympic had 16 portholes in this area, while the Titanic was designed with 14. Photographs of the Titanic on its maiden voyage, they claim, show 16 portholes, evidence, they say, that this was actually the Olympic in disguise. Another point raised by conspiracy theorists is the ship's promenade deck. On the Olympic, this deck was open for its entire length, while on the Titanic, the forward part was enclosed. Photos of the Titanic, they argue, show an open promenade deck, suggesting it was actually the Olympic. The theory also posits that certain damage from the Hawk collision was visible on the Titanic during its maiden voyage. They point to reports of the ship listing slightly to port as evidence of unrepaired damage from the collision. But the switch theory doesn't stop at physical evidence. It also weaves a tale of insider knowledge and convenient absences. J.P. Morgan, the powerful financier who owned the White Star Line's parent company, was supposed to be on the Titanic's maiden voyage, but canceled at the last minute. Conspiracy theorists see this as evidence that Morgan knew of the plan and ensured he wouldn't be on board the doomed vessel. Similarly, the theory points to several last-minute cancellations by wealthy and influential passengers as further evidence of foreknowledge of the impending disaster. These include industrialist Henry Clay Frick, chocolate tycoon Milton S. Hershey, and banker Robert Bacon. The motive for this elaborate switch, according to the theory, was insurance fraud. By sinking the already damaged Olympic under the guise of the Titanic, the White Star Line could claim the insurance money for a new ship rather than bearing the cost of repairing the Olympic. Some versions of the theory even suggest that the plan was not to sink the ship entirely, but to stage a relatively safe accident where all passengers could be rescued by nearby ships. Of course, if this was the plan, it went horribly wrong. The ship struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic on the night of April 14, 1912, and sank in the early hours of April 15, resulting in the deaths of more than 1,500 people. The Olympic switch theory paints a picture of corporate greed and callous disregard for human life on an almost unimaginable scale. It suggests a conspiracy involving not just the White Star Line, but shipbuilders, dock workers, crew members, and even some of the wealthiest people in the world. While mainstream historians and maritime experts roundly reject this theory, pointing to numerous flaws in its logic and evidence, it continues to captivate many. The idea of such a grand deception plays into our fascination with conspiracy and cover-ups, and offers an alternative narrative to what many see as a senseless tragedy. If we accept the Olympic switch theory, this tragic loss of life was not the result of hubris and unfortunate circumstances, but the consequence of a cold-blooded plan gone horribly wrong. The theory suggests that the plan was never to cause such a catastrophic loss of life, but rather to stage a controlled accident where all passengers could be safely evacuated. However, critics of the theory point out the numerous flaws in this logic. The idea that a shipping company would intentionally endanger a ship full of passengers, including some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world, stretches credulity. The risk of discovery and the moral implications of such a plan would surely have been too great. Moreover, the financial motive for such a scheme doesn't hold up to scrutiny. The insurance payout for the Titanic was far less than the cost of building the ship, making it a financial loss, not a gain. The White Star Line's reputation took a massive hit from the disaster, causing long-term damage to their business that far outweighed any potential insurance payout. Despite these logical inconsistencies, the Olympic switch theory persists. It speaks to a human desire to find order and intention in chaotic events. The idea that the Titanic disaster was planned rather than a terrible accident might paradoxically be more comforting to some than accepting the random cruelty of fate. However, it's crucial to remember the real human cost of the Titanic disaster. Over 1,500 people lost their lives that night, leaving behind grieving families and shattered communities. The tragedy led to significant changes in maritime safety regulations, including requirements for enough lifeboats for all passengers, 24-hour radio watch on ships, and the formation of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. Whether one believes in the conspiracy theory or not, the events of April 14th and 15th, 1912, remain one of the most significant maritime disasters in history. The sinking of the Titanic continues to fascinate us, not just because of the scale of the tragedy, but because it represents a collision between human hubris and the unforgiving power of nature. And if you want to dive deeper into the mysteries of the ocean, make sure you're subscribed to this channel.